It's the fifth leadership change at the MBTA in as many years after a short and troubled tenure for Luis Ramirez, who left a Dallas area energy company to come to Boston and lead the troubled transit agency. His departure comes just 15 months after he stepped into the job, promising big changes.
It's my first day at the T. I'm excited to be here. As you all know, I'm new to Boston. We're going to work on the long-term solutions that really drive the changes that need to be made here so that the ridership sees that improvement.
New to Boston. Instead, over the past year plus, the red and green lines have seen a slew of signal problems and track derailments. There have been complaints of crumbling infrastructure at commuter rail stations, not to mention chronic delays during snow and cold weather. But Ramirez isn't the only out-of-towner to struggle here in Boston. Former Boston Public Schools Superintendent Tommy Chang came in from L.A., stepped down from his post in June, just 2 years into a 5-year contract. During his brief tenure, the school system faced an IRS audit, an immigration lawsuit, racism at Boston Latin, and parent outrage over a plan to change school start times. And the trend doesn't stop there, at least not according to Boston Globe columnist Adrian Walker, who argues, quote, Ramirez joins a long list of outsiders who somehow failed to make it in Boston. And he says, if only traditional leaders can succeed here, Boston will be hard-pressed to build or attract the more diverse leadership it desperately needs. Adrian Walker joins me now. Nice to see you, Adrian.
Great to see you.
Along with former independent candidate for governor Evan Falchuk. Evan's now chair and CEO of Village Plan. Evan, it's good to see you, too. So what's your thesis? I started it, but finish it for me. What's your basic thesis?
My thesis is that it's a real problem that only people from Boston can succeed in Boston. And whether Luis Ramirez was the right person to run the T or not, which is debatable, there's no way the failure rate of people from outside running agencies in Massachusetts should be nearly 100%, which is what it is.
Well, what do you say? I mean, Ramirez, as we know, even though the Baker administration said they knew about it, left a trail of investor lawsuits and financial problems at his company. Tommy Chang, Paul Reville, former Secretary of Education, said on a radio show before the choice, it's a weak field of 4, and the least weak, which is not much of an endorsement, is Tommy Chang. So it's possible they were just the wrong choices, isn't it possible?
I actually don't think that's true of Tommy Chang. And as for Ramirez, who knows? I mean, he had no background in transportation, but they knew that when they hired him. How is it that they were so in love with this guy 15 months ago, and now they've soured on him?
How is it that they were so in love? And they apparently were. They brought him in from out of town. The Baker administration did.
Well, for starters, Boston actually is a place where people come from all over the world to be successful, whether it's in healthcare, science, or technology, startups, businesses like the ones that we see everywhere.
How about in these high-profile public
Well, this is a leadership problem. Now, Luis Ramirez, not competent to do this job. The others as well don't have the background to do it. So it's their fault that they failed. They should never have been hired in the first place. And so to the extent you can blame the people for that, it's because we vote for people that hire people like that.
So his thesis is wrong. Adrian's thesis is wrong because all the people he cited were the wrong people for the job. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely right.
What do you say to that?
A year ago, Ramirez was this guy from the private sector. They wanted someone from the private sector. He was going to bring this new lens. He was going to bring this fresh perspective. Okay? What happened to all of that?
What did happen?
And why wasn't it worth? And why wasn't it worth giving it more than 15 months to succeed?
How about that?
They were wrong. I mean, people in business make bad hiring decisions all the time, and not surprisingly, when that happens, usually they don't blame themselves. They say, "Oh, you know, it's his fault for not doing the job properly." But the leader, the buck has to stop there. There's something wrong with the process that hires people that don't have experience running transit systems. Ramirez didn't have any experience doing that. You look at a city like New York, they hired this guy, Andy Byfield. You might have seen him in the news. He's run transit systems all around the world.
You know what? If Andy Byfield came to Boston, he'd last 2.5 years.
And why do you say, what is it
Because
exactly?
anybody who isn't from Southie or Dorchester or in the club who goes into the T gets eaten alive.
By whom? Who are the eaters in your
They get
scenario?
eaten alive by the people internally, the senior staff. They get eaten alive by labor. They get eaten alive by the whole environment.
Now, you don't buy the notion, even if you disagree on some of the specific people, there is an insular, small town kind of feel here, is there not?
I think he's 100%
well, that's not very
right.
welcoming to people who are not from here, is it? Like me, for example. It took me a bunch of years moving from New York, by the way. I testified in front of the Cambridge City Council where I live. I just thought of this a minute ago. Like 5 years in, and Al Vellucci, the legendary city councilor, almost threw me out of the hall because I'd only lived in his city and paid taxes for 5 years. That's not that aberrational.
We are not the most welcoming city in America.
So isn't that part of his point?
I think it's part of his point when you look at an organization like the T that you need leaders that can go and break through that stuff. And so bringing in a person who doesn't have the competence to run that kind of organization is a setup for failure.
Can I give you a couple of examples also, and tell me how these are exceptions to your notion? I think you've probably heard of most of these people. Deval Patrick.
Okay.
He came from out of town, didn't he? He did fairly well, didn't he?
Yes.
Okay, can I name somebody else?
Yes.
Adrian Walker. He's from Miami. Do you know him, by the way?
I've met him, yes.
Jim Braude from New York. And I'm serious. I mean, well,
okay, but we're talking about people in government. We're talking about people who are dealing with political constituencies. It's completely different.
Well,
from
Deval Patrick was obviously in government.
Well, okay, Deval Patrick is a huge aberration in 12 ways. You want to talk about those? You want to talk about all the ways Deval Patrick is the only person who's done what Deval Patrick has done?
Well, sure. Why? Because because of his talent? Is that what you...
name another Massachusetts governor from Chicago.
Well, I know, but there aren't that many out-of-town governors. So how about if we do stay within the public sector? Does he have a point, or does he not have a point?
I think he's got a point that leadership is what matters. And so if you can hire people that can break through that challenge, these aren't easy problems to solve. So fixing the T is like getting involved in a land war in Asia. It's a tough fight, and you better make sure you know what you're doing. So leaders hire really strong people to go in and take on those challenges, wherever they might be.
Do you worry about the
it's
impact?
interesting that nobody has ever really explained why Ramirez was fired or what specifically he failed at.
Well, maybe
that's something I'd like to hear.
But I think that Marty Walsh was pretty kind to Tommy Chang on the way out the door, too, and I assume part of the reason is that's how you cut a deal for a departure. And, two, I don't think they want to destroy the careers of people who came here in good faith. Is that not a
Sure,
fair
but
statement?
don't you wonder where it all went south?
Well, I do, of course.
I think it's a fair question.
Do you worry about the impact of
let me say one other thing.
You may.
I think a lot of this is about support. Menino brought in a superintendent from Memphis, Carol Johnson, didn't allow the various constituencies around the BPS to tear her apart. She lasted here 6 or 7 years, and she did fine. I mean, she wasn't fantastic.
Do you think one thing you haven't said? Let me add a third person to your list who I love personally. I have no idea if she was ready for the job or not. She also ran the T, and one of her most memorable moments is Beverly Scott, of course, is right during Snowmageddon in 2015. Here's Beverly Scott.
We do not control Mother Nature, and I wish that I could tell you that I have a crystal ball. I don't have a crystal ball, and quite candidly, I've been around 40 years. I have been through hurricanes. I've been through World Trade Center bombings, tornadoes coming, 30 inches, 36 inches, and all that. So this ain't this woman's first rodeo.
I love that line. I've always loved that. Those three people have something in common, the three people you cited, not just people who are from out of town who didn't do well. What's the other thing they have in common?
The other thing is that people are called.
And do you think that's part of the deal?
I think that's part of being an outsider. I think that makes them even more... It adds to their outsider status.
Do you not think, you agree that we're an unwelcoming place to begin with.
We have a racism problem.
Right, in this series that he contributed to, we were the #1 city out of 8 major American cities, which black Americans said was least welcoming to them. So it's an extension of that notion.
Yeah.
So do you think those newcomers, we're talking about, I was going to mention your boss, by the way, too. John Henry's from out of town. He's a white guy. No, he's not in government. Yeah. He's pretty welcome. Of course, he won, and he's done pretty well. No, but I'm serious. Do you think the color of their skin is part of the reason why they're on the list of yours?
I do, and I also think that one of the reasons this is so important is that we'll never get to a more diverse leadership in the public sector in this town if people of color from outside always fail.
How about that?
We need to hire competent people. And sure, we need a more diverse leadership structure in Massachusetts, absolutely, positively. It does nobody any favors, though, when we don't hire people that are competent for their jobs.
You've worked in the business world for much of your life. Does a column like Adrian Walker's create a disincentive for people who are contemplating coming here to come here? When somebody is a candidate for a job, let's say, they now have a head of the T. There's another major government, Massport, major government things that opens up.
Yeah.
And obviously they Google, Adrian Walker's column comes up, a respected guy in town, who says, we don't welcome people into these positions. They're spit out in 15 months, 2 years, whatever. What impact does that have?
I don't think, and Adrian's column he's right, it's a great column, so I'm not trying to say that Adrian is ruining Boston, because he's not.
I'm not saying you are. I'm asking about what the impact is of a prominent voice saying something like that about a town like
reflecting
this.
Things that go on in Boston. There's an issue that people of color, when they look at Boston, worry about, is this a place where I want to be with my family? And we have to come to grips with that as white people.
And do we come to grips with that by creating, you mentioned the word support, you did in your column and you do it here too. We have to create a better infrastructure for people from elsewhere to succeed in our? Is that the
Yes,
solution to the problems you see?
We have to create a better infrastructure, and we have to give them more than 15 months to succeed or fail.
How'd you succeed from Miami? How'd that work out, by the way? How'd that happen?
It just happened, you know.
Just talent, I guess.
Yeah, I was just a great writer.
Evan, great to see you. Adrian, great to see you. Thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.